theyeshiva.net.
It's interesting, I was in Morristown yesterday, in New Jersey. I have a boy who learns there, in the yeshiva there. So I was walking through their gym. They have a big gym. I was walking through their gym, so somebody stopped me. He introduced himself. His name is Daniel. His family comes from the Ukraine. His father is not Jewish. His mother is a Ukrainian Jew, a secular woman. And they ultimately left Ukraine. They moved to Israel, and then they relocated to Canada. I say, how did I see he's with him in Yarmulke, he's in yeshiva. So I asked him how his journey began. So he told me that, as he grew up as a Jewish kid, it's very secular, completely secular family. His father not Jewish, his father's a doctor, his mother's a nurse, a good Russian career family. And he got into Zen meditation, which is a practice of many, many Jews. 30% of Buddhists in America are Jews, if I'm not mistaken. So, and he described to me the meditation techniques that he got involved in. He took it very seriously. And one of the meditations he was doing is about how all existence is preceded by awareness. And to be able to go into that space. And from that space, if you can really experience it, there's oneness. And it touched him very deeply. One thing bothered him. He said in every meditation that he did this for a very long time, 2 boxes kept on showing up, which was the opposite of oneness. Everything was one, besides 2 boxes. And it drove him crazy. And he says, even when he would finish the meditation, he's a very, very normal, intelligent kid, those 2 boxes would stay. And he decided he has to get to the bottom of it, because everybody who was involved with, in terms of meditation, non-Jews, couldn't understand it. It was triggering something, and he didn't know what it is. So he says one day he just decided to open every drawer in the house. And he opened the drawer, and he sees a talus. And he removes the talus, and he sees 2 boxes of tefillin. And he says, that's it. That's it. And he told me that when he was 13, he put on tefillin. He said when he was 12, he put on tefillin once in his life. And that image kept on coming back in every single meditation. And it wouldn't stop throughout the day. And he had to go on a search. What is the significance? Why is this disturbing his oneness? And that began a journey. And today he's in yeshiva. So I told him that we're learning now a Maimah. So he listens to a lot of my shiurim, the Maimarim especially, Likkutei Torah. So I told him that we're now learning a Maimah that Alter Rebbe, when he wants to give an example of how Yiddishkeit is all about bringing the yesh back to the ayin of oneness, his first example is tefillin. The tefillin, you take parchment and you write echad on it. And that echad redefines the nature of the parchment and the ink and the scribe and the animal and the person putting on tefillin and their arm and their head. So this was, I said, you're a living example of this in a very deep, super conscious way. This was just yesterday morning, so I wanted to share this. It was very interesting. So after a long discussion and conversation, a very long one, I think 10 shiurim, 9 shiurim, whatever we had, I don't remember. 12? Okay. You'd basically alachsen of Shabbos, of a neshama, of the world, of shame, of Iyar, of yesh, of ayin, of Mamala Kalam and of Sevav Kalam. And that the ultimate aliyah of the neshama that only happens in and through its descent into our body and its physical embodiment in our world is the tuning in to Sevav, with all the details and nuances that Alter Rebbe discussed, and how that's the tachlis and the yesod of all the mitzvahs, and it happens in Olam Haza. And he finally finished that Chiyas HaMesim always needs the moedim, mandaloi kara b'moedim, somebody who has no moedim in their life, which means no form of bittul whatsoever, in one way or another way. Can't experience Chiyas HaMesim, because Chiyas HaMesim is all about bittul, that's what it is. It's not even a punishment. I can't be present there. It's all about bittul. So finally, the Alter Rebbe now comes back to Shabbos, which is how the Maimer began. So it's page 84, Siv Daled. On top it should say Behar. As I told you, these paragraphs, everything has a kitzer. So Machzadik wrote a kitzer, an abbreviation, just to summarize it. So we have the kitzer of the last paragraph. It's good to read. I'll read it. The kitzer doesn't explain. It just reminds you the topic. It also teaches you how to summarize. When you finish learning a paragraph, you have to be able to summarize. If not, it's teignisht, as they say. So he says, and the diuk here is the light. Atzmos is not begeder sovev. It is. It's even beyond being called is. Isness is also a definition. Iyar is always experience. That's Iyar. Iyar is always experience. Iyar is how I experience something. It's the name. It's never the thing. It's the name. That's experience. That's the chiddush. That experience is also sovev. You would think Atzmos is beyond experience in terms of experience. It's not beyond anything, but in terms of experience, it's beyond experience. Iyar is about experience. The chiddush is that even our experience of the finite reality is really an experience of the infinity. So that's the chiddush of tzimtzum, not kipshuta. That your experience of the finite is really an experience of infinity. You just have to be able to trace it back to its source. So when you say the Iyar is Sevav Kalam, and that means our infinity is really our experience. That's what every person is capable of when you can trace back everything to its core. So there's two elements, the Sevav and Mamal. Shebchinas Mamala Kalam, and im heyoyse gamkin bchinas Iyar u'shmei levad, im kol zehu ein seif mamish. So here he defines it. Sevav Kalam is called Iyar, it's called the name, and it's levad, but it's Ein Sof Mamish v'lachein nikra Shmei HaGadol. Avol b'chinas Mamala Kalam hamislabish b'toich olam asurak ha'ara b'tzimtzemes. It's a constricted articulation of the energy, and it's not two lights. We call it two, because language creates duality, but it's not two. It's one. It's not like Hashem says, "Okay, now I have this light. I have this light." It's one light. In our perception, there's a duality. Understand? That's the key. The Iyar itself is Ein Sof. The Alter Rebbe used to teach Iyar Ein Sof. The Iyar is Ein Sof. Why? If you're talking about Hashem, in other words, most people, when they read Iyar Ein Sof, they think it's the Iyar of the Ein Sof. The Alter Rebbe says, if it already comes from the Ramak, if Iyar Ein Sof means the Iyar of Ein Sof, he should have been called Ein Lo Tchila. You remember we learned the Basi Lagani Tovshin Chav Bais. Ein Lo Tchila is much deeper than Ein Lo Sof. There are things, if Hashem wants, they don't have to end, but they have a beginning. The chiddush is, Ein Lo Tchila is much deeper than Ein Sof. Ein Sof means you have no end. Ein Lo Tchila means you have no beginning. That's deeper. If you have no beginning, you have no end. But you can have no end, because Hashem doesn't want you to end. He wants you to be eternal, but you have a beginning. You have a source. Right? Anything finite can't create itself. Because if it was here, the Chovos HaLevavos says, Ein davar oises atzmai. Because if you weren't here, how did you create yourself? And if you were here, so you created yourself, then who created that? That's a shaila and something that yesh lo tchila, something that ein lo tchila. transcends matter or space or time, doesn't have to be created. So if Oir Ein Sof means the Oir of Ein Sof, the Ramak says it should have been called Oir Ein Lo Tchila. The Oir of Ein Lo Tchila. So the Alter Rebbe says Oir Ein Sof means the Oir is Ein Sof. The Oir is Yesh Lo Tchila. You can't say Ein Lo Tchila on the Oir. It has a Tchila. It's like the ray of the sun. Of course it has a beginning. It comes from the sun. That's why it's called Oir Ein Sof, not Oir Ein Lo Tchila. That's how the Balatanya explains it in other places. And the key for all of this is that Medrash and Pirkei Rebbe Lezer that he quotes earlier. Ashlei nivra ha'olam ha'yahu shmai belvad. Before the world was created, there was him and his name. It was him. It was him. First of all, what's the chiddush of the Medrash? That God was here before creation? Yeah, if he created the world, he had to be here before creation. He couldn't have been created together with the world, because then who created him? You know, the first question people say, who created God? If God needs a creator, then it's not that type of inyan. It's a different type of inyan. You're imagining Hashem in terms of the world. So first of all, what's the chiddush that he was here before creation? What does it mean? He was here with his name. So the Alter Rebbe's tight chair is, and this has ramifications, ad ein sof, literally. If you say before creation he was here with his name, it means that all creation was here before creation. Because that's what the name is. The name is the ability to articulate yourself in a way that you can be experienced as an atom, or as a cell, or as a neuron, or as a squirrel, or as an ant, or as a bat, or as a bee, or as a beer, or as a groundhog, or as a black hole. That's the name. I could say a few more adjectives, a few more titles, but you get the point, I hope. If you say he was here with his name before, it means all creation was here. Because that's Shmoi. But how was it here? It wasn't here as Oisius. It wasn't here as Mamali. It was here as Oir, as Ein Sof. The ramifications of that, of course, are very profound in terms of Achdus, in terms of what the world really is, in terms of what we're capable of connecting to, v'chuli. V'shoyrish ha-neshamas, mebchinas yishtabach shimcha. Hainu mebchinas mamala kalam, and mebchinas chachma. No small thing. The shana comes from chachma. V'haliyah in this world is gili sevav kalam. V'gili zeh nimshach adei maisa mitzvahs. Shetklalusan Torah avoid gemilas chsadim shetachlis yisodoisam bittul hayesh. Vaydei nimshach haschar mitzvah gili b'chinas ayin shalamayla me'achachma ma'ashachachma t'notzik b'chinas zu derech yesh me'ayin. Now I just wanted to comment. Somebody said a few days ago, if you embrace Sevav Kalalman, a tzaddik and a rasha are the same. Yeah, that was your comment. So I didn't want to lose the flow, but I just want to be Masaka in the comment. Just Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was the Rosh Hashiva of Ponovich. So he would often say in his shiurim, "Abissal hamtaka." You know what hamtaka is? Huh? A little splendor, sweet and low. Or in the old days it was a sugar cube, but today that's forbidden. Abissal hamtaka. Yeah, so just abissal hamtaka. It's not pshat in Sevav Kalalman, a tzaddik and a rasha are the same. It's pshat that in Sevav Kalalman, the rasha is nishkin rasha. You understand? Huh? The male of the rasha is not a rasha. But it's different. Yeah, and he said before that Medrash said that Hashem consulted Nishmeseyim shel tzaddikim, v'amacholam tzaddikim on the etzem bria sa'olam. In other words, there's an inyan in the neshama that's deeper than bria. So Dalet, Siv Dalet, Perik Dalet. V'nei me'ata yuvan gam kedinyan shtei Shabbos kilchasa. After the whole arichis, and only after the whole arichis, we could understand the shtei Shabbos kilchasa. What's the shtei Shabbos kilchasa? He quoted earlier. The Gemara says in Masaka Shabbos, "Ilmoli Yisrael Meshamner Shtei Shabbos Kilchasa Miyadei Negolim." And Jews keep two Shabbosim the way they have to. They're redeemed. In Yerushalmi it says one Shabbos. So the Balatanya said it's not a contradiction. He's talking about two dimensions of Shabbos within each Shabbos. Within each Shabbos there's two Shabboses. Kihine HaShabbos Hu Aliyas Ha'olamus. He started over the Maimer. It says in Kisvei Harizal, Shabbos is a time of Aliyah Sailamus. The worlds ascend. That's their language. What does Aliyah Sailamus mean? He asked at the beginning of the Maimer, Leisa sar panimine, there's no space devoid of Hashem. So what do worlds have to go up? They can stay down. What's so more exciting about up than down? If Kedusha Shabbos means there's some revelation of the Ein Sof in the world, so he's down here too. Maloi chalaretz kvoida. Leisa sar panimine. There's no space devoid of him. Why is the Lashon Aliyah Soilemus? What does it mean? What does it even mean, Aliyah Soilemus? The worlds go up. What happens? Haliyah hainu gam kim chines bittel. When you say the word Aliyah, what it means is, it doesn't mean you have to go up to a second floor, to a third floor. Aliyah means there's a concept, there's the bittel of the yesh to the ayin. Going up here means that, what does it mean going up? It's not in physical space. Going up here means the person opens up to a deeper interpretation of reality. That's what Aliyah means. Aliyah means here, the person opens themselves up or gets opened up. That could be different situations. What depends on what causes the bittul. Either they open themselves up or they get opened up to a deeper interpretation of the same reality. And the change in that is very profound. You know, what happens when sometimes somebody lives in a certain perception of reality for many, many years? And that's what makes them tick. That's their orbit. And then one day, or after a long time, but things happen or something happens or there's deep work, whatever the circumstances that cause it are, and then suddenly, or not suddenly, but what happens is you see the same reality. It's the same person, maybe the same room, the same spouse, the same children, the same world, the same God, but you see something else. Your interpretation, your experience of the reality is completely different. You may, for example, open up to the fact of a certain stuckness you were in, a certain perception that you were living in, and the whole world was being experienced from that place of perception. And then suddenly that perception dissolves or expands, and you're like, OMG. And I don't mean, oh my Google. Did this happen to anyone sitting here in this room ever? Huh? And you're only 18 years old. Wait till you get 48. It'll happen a lot of times. If it happened when you're 18, it's going to happen another few times, which is good. Sometimes it's not just, I found out new information. I'm not talking about information. It's like the world is a different world. For the first time, you see who your wife is, or who your husband is, or who you are, or who your child is, or whatever. Kel Nakama Seifia. I spoke of you. Kel Nakama Seifia, for the first time he appears. It's very, very intense experience because you have to rethink everything, because everything I was doing and thinking was based on an old reality, on an old interpretation. Reality didn't change. My interpretation changed. A paradigm shift. So you have paradigm shifts in terms of realities that are more objective, if I'm studying science or whatever, different people who invent or create new ideas, but you have paradigm shifts when it comes to your own internal emotional state of being. It's a very, very profound transformation. Now, some people will fight this tooth and nail. Until their last breath, they will not go there. They know, their soul feels it. So they do not go there. They will fight you tooth and nail. And if they have a good head, they'll convince you how you're stupid. I knew of a person, he was a very, very brilliant man. He's already on the Olam Emes. But he had a little challenge, some challenges. So they put him up with a therapist. He was a really smart guy. So I asked, what happened? He said, he convinced the therapist that the therapist is Beshuga. So now the therapist is going to therapy. He Pasha convinced that he's Beshuga. He made him question his own existence. Why should you make me question my existence? I'll make you question your existence. The point is, right, sometimes I'll fight it subconsciously because it's not an easy place to go to. That's how he's teaching. So all Aliyah Soilam is a teach bittel. What's bittel? Bittel means I unravel things. I remove layers that open me up to a deeper way of experiencing the reality. That's called bittel. And it's always, it's a bittul because it nullifies an outer layer and it goes into a deeper layer. That's what we spoke before, the aliyah of the future. The aliyah is hanashamas. Beyond Gan Eden, what was the aliyah? We said the neshama comes back into a guf. That's not an aliyah, it's a yerida. Gan Eden is an aliyah. So why are you calling that the ultimate aliyah? It's the ultimate yerida. You say by Iyar says the neshama is lahaban an aliyah. Chiyas HaMesim is the neshama is lahaban a yerida. Wrong bracha. Neshama is lahaban a yerida. Why is that called aliyah? Aliyah doesn't mean if you're going up or going down. It's how you're going to view the guf. The moment you're going to understand, appreciate Seivav Kalalman, call it a yerida. That's the biggest aliyah. Why? Aliyah doesn't mean I go from the Gashmi to the Ruach. Aliyah means the way I see and I experience and I interpret the reality. So he says, V'ha'inyan, to explain this, what is the Sinion of Shabbos? Kihine pirush vayishbes b'yoyim hashvi. The language in Parshas Bereshis, which we say every Friday night in davening and we say it in Kiddush. Vayichal Elokim b'yoyim hashvi malachta asherasa. How do we touch the pasuk? It's a little bit of a longish pasuk. So if you just translate it literally, there's a lot of redundancies. Yeah, you say Vayichal Elokim b'yoyim hashvi vayichulu hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tzavam. What does that mean? Vayichulu, people will touch heaven and earth finished. Vayichal Elokim b'yoyim hashvi malachta asherasa. Elokim finished on the seventh day the work he did. Vayishbois b'yoyim hashvi makam malachta asherasa. And then he rested on the seventh day from all the malacha that he did. Vayivarech Elokim. The Baal HaTanya says these words capture the essence of Shabbos. They're not just saying something technical. What does it mean? He rested on the seventh day. It already said Vayichal Elokim. So we'll say rest doesn't mean he rested. God didn't sit on a couch. It means he stopped working. But you just said that. Beautiful. He stopped working. He finished. No more creation. Great. So we also don't create on Shabbos. Makes sense. But then you said, he rested. What is that supposed to look like? I understand when you say a person rested, they exerted themselves for 6 days. They worked 12 hours a day, maybe 20 hours a day, and barely slept and barely ate and barely had time to relax. Comes a day and you're like, plop down, we're going to sleep. I get it. So what's pshat vayishbas b'yom hashvi? What's the Sinion? So you'll say it's a metaphor. It doesn't mean he rested. He didn't have to rest. But you already said he finished his work. So the pasuk is trying to say something. Vayishbas. Says the Alter Rebbe, no, it means vayishbas. Hu al derech mashal. For this you need a mashal. May adam shah says a malacha, a person who was engaged in labor. Kamay shekasev eze seichel. An example he gives here is somebody who writes, a writer. Writing is not a simple task. If there's any writers sitting here in this room, I know we have a few writers, to take an idea and really transcribe it in a way that it's eligible and pleasing to the eye and to the intellectual palate, it's serious malacha. What happens? He's going to describe now what writing is. Kadarka in a few lines, but what you have to know, if you ever want to become a writer, this is what you're going to have to do. Achi yislabish behamidus v'hamachshava v'achar kach yerdim kulum mislabshim b'koyach ha'maisa v'achar shenoch mimelachtoy choyzrim kol ha'koyches u'misalim v'nechlalim b'koyach ha'seichel u'ba'atzmos ha'nefesh. Writing, you have to completely tune in to the words. You're taking your internal experience. He says you have to take your seichel, which is your awareness, your mind. And if I leave it the way it's in my mind, that's not writing. Writing requires what's called tzimtzum. I have to completely focus in and have it go through levushim. It has to, he says, it has to go into the midas, it has to go into machshava, and then it has to get into my fingers and get down on paper, which is koyach ha'maisa. And that's an avodah. You have people who have grand ideas. Write it down, there's a blockage, I can't write it. They write it down, you don't even understand what they're saying. They themselves don't understand what they're saying. By the way, speaking is a similar avodah, but writing is even more. Because speaking, you can get away with redundancies. Speaking, you can get away with redundancies. Yes, speaking, you can get away with redundancies. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek. In writing, you can't. Speaking, you can get away with using a few adjectives. It works. So writing, you can't. It has to be meduyik. I'm talking about good writing. I'm not talking about, ziburis, shabaziburis. The difference of good writing and bad writing is not a different alphabet. You're using the same alphabet, but it's the tziruf, it's the combination of the same letters, Filthy words and eloquent words are using the same A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, right? But this produces something exceptional, inspiring, exceptional, deep, and this is, trash. It belongs in the dustbin. A Yid once came to the Ragachover Gon. He was very sharp. With a sefer, he wouldn't give haskamas easily. So he looks at the sefer, pss, 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 pss. He's very, seems impressed. So the Jew was really taken aback because they told him that Ragachover, is nicht, he's not that person. So, and then he gives it back to him. So he says, the Rav is going to give me haskama? He says, no, of course not. So he says, why were you going, pss, pss? He says, I was impressed with the phenomenon. Usually I'm used to, he says, as von Schmattes macht man Papier. Aber du hast gemacht von Papier Schmattes. Which means most people, they take Schmattes and they turn it into paper. He says, you took paper and you reverted it back into Schmattes. I was very impressed. There's different types of writing. The idea of ksiva, though, is it takes a tremendous effort to take that whole inner awareness, and I have to, he says, translate it from seichel into midas. Midas is always experience, emotion, sensation. You feel it. It has to go into machshava. Machshava are thoughts. That's not seichel. Like we learned before, seichel and machshava are friends or enemies. They're together, but they're not the same. Right? Seichel and machshava are not the same. They're always, machshava comes with seichel, but it's not the same thing. And from there, that's still not enough. I can have it formulated beautifully in my mind. Now you got to get it down on paper. That's a whole other avodah. You're saying, Al Rebbe did it in these lines, gufa. Yeah. And it takes tremendous effort. It's like you have to go into the zone, and you could sometimes sit. Real writers can sit hours and hours and hours on a sentence. It used to be, when I was a kid, there was typewriters, right? Some of you remember typewriters. Today, right, you cut and paste, you copy and paste. It's a little bit of an easier avodah. But real writers, whether it's with their hands or typewriters, you sat sometimes on a sentence. How to describe a sentence. It's a little bit of a lost art today by many, because with text, you're not allowed to even spell a word completely. Chas v'shalom to write U. It's like UW. With the emojis, you could be really illiterate. But the point here is, ksiva is an avodah. What happens when I finish writing? So he says, what happens? The koiches come back, and they're mis'ala, and they're resubsumed in the koich ha'seichel and atzmos ha'nefesh. We say in Yiddish, there's an expression, person was working, where ich bin gekommen zu sich. Ich darf kommen zu sich. Ich darf kommen zu sich. I have to go back to myself. You weren't yourself. You were lying. You were faking. You were wearing a mask. You were wearing a Purim costume. Ich darf zurückkommen zu sich means my energy was being projected and being focused and tuned into a particular task, which completely defines it. Kommen zu sich means that whole creative power could, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, go back and become part of the person himself. So all my koiches went into the malacha, and exhaustion comes from distance. The more I'm investing in the work, the more I'm exhausted, because my energy is really being challenged to go into something. So I'm getting more exhausted and more exhausted. What's pshat menucha? What's pshat serenity? Ich komm zurück zu sich. I come back to myself. Yeah. My koiches, my faculties, so to speak, are reclaimed by me. When I'm doing work, they can't be reclaimed by me. The same is true when a person is writing. The same is true in other types of malachas. He's giving here an example of malachas aksiva, but the same is true with everything else. If a person is playing basketball, if a person is mopping the floor, if a person is doing a wash, if a person is in construction, if a person is doing artwork, if a person is writing blueprints, if a person is sitting and counseling patients or clients, if a person is running around to appointments, whatever your form of work is, to do the good work, your creative energy, your emotional energy needs to be focused and invested in it, and it, so to speak, goes away from you, and that's very exhausting, because also definition of exhaustion. Exhaustion I'm working hard. Why what's working hard? Working hard means there's somewhat of a nituk, a dissonance, a separation between me and my koiches. My koiches are out there. Sometimes you come back from an event, you're exhausted, you didn't do anything, right? But you did a lot. Some people come back from an event, you're exhausted for 3 days, especially if you're an empath and you're sensitive. Why? Because whenever I'm in a matzav that my koiches have to go out, for some people just being social, not everybody will relate to it, but just saying hi to everybody, right? Anybody knows what I'm talking about? It's exhausting. It's just exhausting. It's like, I have to go back, take a salt bath. You need to reclaim your energy. But every malacha is that, in this form or that form. So when it reunites with me, he calls it's nichlal. It goes back up. What does it mean it goes back up? Not physically, it goes back up. It's resubsumed. In me, that's called serenity, menucha. Kach al derech mashal. That's what vayishbos b'yom hashvi. You say Hashem rested. It means those words. What's pshat rested? Kach al derech mashal sheishes yamim asa Hashem. Hashem makes the world in 6 days. And the Balatanya teaches, it should have said b'sheishes yamim, not sheishes yamim. In 6 days he made the world. No. Sheishes yamim, he made 6 days. Each day is one of the midas. That's what he made. He had to articulate infinity into the concept of 6 days. The divine chachma and the divine midas descended through many, many filters, restrictions. They condensed themselves, restricted themselves to enclose themselves in asara mamaras. What's asara mamaras? Asara mamaras are 10 sentences. It's the same true with a speech, just like writing. I have all these amazing ideas. Now I have 10 minutes to speak. It's called asara mamaras. Say it in 10 minutes. I can't say it in 10 minutes. If you can't say it in 10 minutes, don't say it. You can't say it. Can you articulate it? And you want the olam should understand it. If you want the olam to understand it, you can't give them what you're thinking. You have to give them what they're capable of receiving. That's tzimtzum. So asa Hashem sheishes yamim, to be able to take Ein Sof and to articulate it and let it go through a process where it suddenly becomes the engine of a finite universe. And when I say the engine of a finite universe, I'm not talking about one engine. I'm talking about endless engines, because every nivra has a different consciousness and a different chemistry, which is based on one of the asara mamaras or on a combination of letters. Asara mamaras begins, it's 10, but there's not 10 creatures in this world. Most of the Nivraim are not mentioned in Bereshis. Why? There's no rocks in Bereshis. In Bereshis you have light, you have water, you have firmament, you have vegetation, right? You have the sun and the moon and the stars. You have a lot. You have animals, mammals, fish, and a person. But first of all, within fish, you have millions of species. Every fish has different chemistry. Within stars, every different galaxy, every different star. Within people, every person is different. And then there's so many details that are not there. Vegetation, but how many types of vegetation are there? Tachei aretz desha. Between trees and vegetables, legumes, shrubs, branches, so many different types. Every one is a different mimer. And that's all an articulation of Ein Sof. That's called malacha. We're not talking about if God got exhausted, he got a headache from work, he needs to go to sleep. It's the concept of tzimtzum, that's malacha. And that's why in the whole story of creation, you will only find Shem Elokim. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashmayim v'sarz. Vayomer Elokim Iyar. Vayomer Elokim, Vayomer Elokim, Vayomer Elokim. Only Elokim. You know that. There's no other name there. So the big, brilliant Bible critics in Germany said, of course, it's a different author. Bereshis is the first chapter, Bereshis is the second chapter, it's a different author. This was authored by M and this was authored by P. Not allowing themselves to be toifas the Amkus HaInyan, because it's exactly the second chapter introduces Shem Havaya. Why? Shem Elokim represents tzimtzum. What's tzimtzum? Tzimtzum is the filter that blocks out most of the energy, which is what's called tzimtzum. The filter that blocks out most of the energy. Tzimtzum is the prerequisite for creation. If the doors of perception were cleansed and the tzimtzumim would not exist. Everything would appear as is, pure infinity. So the Bria happens of Shem Elokim. Ub'Shabbos ksiv, then comes Shabbos. And here he teaches us, Vayichal Elokim. So how do we teach Vayichal Elokim? Vayichal Elokim, Bayoyim Hashvi Malach Tesherosa. Elokim stopped working. He says, no, there's something much deeper. Vayichal Elokim, Hainu Elokim stopped. Shekalu Upasku Hatzimtzumim. Vayichal Elokim, Elokim ceased. Not Vayichal Elokim, something else. Elokim came to a Vayichal. Tzimtzum ceased. That's the pshat. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the shame of his galus, revelation. Shem Elokim is the shame, it's called Midas Hadin, holding back, tzimtzum, condensing, restricting, filtering. What the conscious brain does to the unconscious brain. It has to filter most of the information, not allowing it to trickle through this little tiny opening, because if it does, it's like taking a cup of water from the Niagara Falls. You can get water from the Niagara Falls. You can get from your sink. Yeah. Here's Taich Vayichal Elokim. Elokim came to an end. Elokim. Huh? On Shabbos, Shekalu Upasku Atzimtzum. What says Paul? What happened? V'oile v'nichlal b'shem Havaya shubchina seivav kalam. That's pshat Aliyas Ha'olemus on Shabbos. Aliyas Ha'olemus on Shabbos means not Elokim was killed. Elokim means it was oile, it was nichlal. The energy of tzimtzum became what it really is. It allowed itself to be reclaimed by what it really is. It's Seivav Kalam. It's infinity. Ukamayal derech mashal hanal aliyas haseichel va'amidas shenishpalu shechayzrim u'misalim l'sharshan. Back to our mashal of the writer. His seichel had to be completely focused and tuned in and filtered and restricted in order to be able to produce this article or this book. And then when you finish, it's like the seichel and the midas, which were in a state of hashpala, they don't disappear. They're just reclaimed by the shayrish, by the source. Mekum tzurik tzizich. By the person that may be sitting down on a couch. But it's not the sitting down on the couch that matters. Yes, that may be just a physical symptom, but it represents the fact I'm coming back. I have to come back to myself. We say it in English, right? In Yiddish, I'm coming back to myself. You weren't yourself. You were faking before, and I wasn't faking. Huh? Tshuva, yeah, that's tshuva. That's tshuva. So this is the type Shabbos. You say Hashem rested. What's pshat rested? The pshat is as follows. The whole world is divine energy. Everything. There's nothing that's not divine energy. If there was no divine energy, it wouldn't live. Everything is divine consciousness. Everything is divine awareness. That's its existence. That's the nature of existence. So what's pshat? He rested from this creation. It means that throughout the 6 days of the week, the divine energy is projected into the malacha, like by a person where my seichel and my midas are going through a tzimtzum, so that they could be completely manifested within these words. And you have to go into that zone. And then Shabbos, the very koiches, the divine koiches, so to speak, are oila, they're reclaimed by the essence. In other words, they go back to their shayrish, which is Ein Sof, which is beyond Tzimtzum. Vayichal Elokim v'zeu shekosov. That's why the expression of Shabbos is in Aseret Hadibros. Shabbos lahavaya, not le'Elokim. Shabbos laHashem. Shabbos liyud-Kei Vav-Kei. Sheish yitzom tavu v'sizikom b'lachtecha v'yom ha'shvi. Shabbos laHashem Elokecha. Over here it's not Bereshis bar Elokim. Bara is Elokim, and Shabbos is lahavaya. Literally, Shabbos laHashem means it's a rest day for Hashem. He says, no, it means something much deeper. It means the Shabbos is a Shabbos of Havaya, of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, instead of the Chiyus of Havaya being filtered through Elokim, which is what creates Memalik Al-Almin. What happens on Shabbos is Vayichal Elokim, and it becomes a Shabbos where it goes all back to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the Gilui of Ein Sof without Tzimtzum. Now you have to understand, if I was playing basketball for 2.5 hours, and I certainly exerted myself. Why? Because my energy was in the ball. It was in the ball. I wasn't a couch potato. And there's a lot of focus. or I was doing exercise, another form of exercise, or I was running, or I was painting a picture, or writing a book, or whatever I was doing. I was trying to convince somebody something on the telephone, right? And I was zoned in, I was tuned in. And that's where I was. I was there. We're talking about a real person. Hashem is real. It's not like I'm not really there. I'm talking to somebody and I'm not listening because I'm texting. That's not avoid. That's not malacha. Malacha is you're there. It captures you. It defines you. You're in a state of tzimtzum. When you're in a conversation with somebody, you have to tune into their world. You can't not tune into their world, and I'm not in a conversation. It's tzimtzum. Koyach tzimtzum. So now I'm finished. I come back to myself. What happens to the painting? The painting remains on the wall. The article remains on the computer. The basketball remains in the field. They tell, the story, they tell about Rabbi Chaim Kanevsky. Somebody asked him if he could play basketball on Shabbos. So he said, what do you do? So they said, you take the ball and you dunk it through the hoop. He says, why can't they just do it before Shabbos? If that's the objective, just do it before Shabbos. So the basketball remains a basketball, and when I finish the laundry remains clean, Baruch Hashem, and the article is on the computer. I came back to myself. But here it's not a little deeper, it's completely different. If the world is divine energy and divine awareness, so when God reclaims his energy, what else goes up? The ganze Welt, the computer too, the article too. That's Aliyah Sailamus. Then God goes back to himself, like, I had enough with you guys. He was himself even during the tzimtzum. The pshat is, the koiches go up, the world goes up. In other words, for a person who has Eidela eyes, it's a different world on Shabbos. It's not the same world. Now you'll ask, I don't see it. When I look at the stars Friday night, it's the same stars like Thursday night. Sorry, no Soiv of Kalama. And when I look at the squirrel outside of my house or the deer, it's a Zelbe deer of Mitvach Banacht. Yeah? They said by the Baal Shem Tov, he would go out Friday night to daven, L'chadoidi, outside of Mezhebush. So the goats, there were a bunch of goats there. And the goats would lift up their forelegs like people. They were standing as a... So I saw somebody writes, I think the Kamarner, the Diditchiver, he says, Avada, it's Aliyah Sa'ilamus. So of course the goats went up. So he said, I don't see it. But it's exactly, we have it in our own life as well. When I look at somebody sitting on a couch, and they seem very relaxed, do I ever know what happened over the last 3 hours and what they're reclaiming their energy from? Unless I sit down and talk to them, I may never know it. All I see is you're sitting. Do I know on your face what you're processing? Do I know what anybody is processing here? Sometimes I could guess, and it's often wrong. I don't know. Do you know what your spouse is processing? If you don't ask, you don't know, right? A brilliant thing I just said. If you don't ask, you don't know. I don't know what you're processing. People could look at you like this, and you just think they're like thinking about, I don't know, Joe Biden. No, not you. And not you either. Donald Trump? Also not. Okay. Right? And what happens? But really the person is processing very deep stuff, but I don't see it. I don't see it. And then you tell me, what I'm going through. No, you're not going through it. I don't see it. You have to have eyes. You have to see the pnimius. So yeah, I look at the world on Shabbos. If my eyes are not filtered themselves, so then I could say there's no difference. But the energy of Shabbos, it's a different world, it's a different reality. There's a story about the Ruzhina, the Heilige Ruzhina. The Bissau Ruzhina, when he was a child, he was learning Gemara in Cheder, and they were learning Masaka Shabbos, I think it's Daf Samach Tes. The teacher was teaching a sugya, Haya Mahalach Bamidbar. If you're walking in a desert, and you don't know when Shabbos is, what do? You lose count of time. So there's two opinions over there. One opinion is you count 6 days and you celebrate Shabbos, or you celebrate Shabbos and you count 6 days. It's either Kibriyase Shel Olam or like Adam Arishon. Adam Arishon, when it was created right away, the next day was Shabbos, and the world waited 6 days before Shabbos. So that's a shaila how you do it. So the Bistral of Rishon, You're lost in a desert. You don't know time. You want to know why he didn't take a cell phone? That's a good kasha. But he didn't take a cell phone, or the battery died. And Google Maps wasn't working. So the Ruzhin told his teacher, Ich verstehe nicht. I don't understand. So he repeated the Gemara. He says, Ich verstehe nicht. He repeated the scenario a few times. After a few times, he says, Yisrael, was verstehst du nicht? Guy is in a desert. He has no calendar, no people. He lost of time. He doesn't know. Is today Monday? Is today Tuesday? Is today Wednesday? Is today Thursday? He's stuck 6 months in the wilderness. It happens. Person loses. You had people in the camps. They didn't know the time. There was always the Jew who knew when Shabbos, Yom Kippur was. I mean, you heard from survivors, you probably heard. They didn't know time. There was no calendar. Right? What do you do with Shabbos? So he says, was verstehst du nicht? So the Ruzhin said, wie kann man nicht wissen? Wie kann man nicht wissen? Man geht a cook in Himmel, und man sagt, das ist Shabbos. You look up and you see it's Shabbos. Why is it so complicated? That's what he said. So the teacher said, now I don't understand. This was they call him the Likkutei Ruzhin. So the point is, we have to be sensitive to that. The outside body language of a person, I may not be able to see in it the tremendous internal changes it goes through. That's why when Chassidus says Aliyas Olamas on Shabbos, it's always the pnimius of the Olamas. Bechitzoni is, you're not going to see a difference. The same plants, but the pnimius, it went from Amali to Soivev. It's Hananda Welt. And that's why things that are, during the week, they're mundane, on Shabbos they're holy. Marshal food. It's a different type of inyan. Tzemach Tzedek once asked the Alter Rebbe, he writes, I asked my Zayda, L'chayda, you're not allowed to do on Shabbos boired, and whenever you eat, you're doing boired, you're being mavared, and the tzutzes. So he said, no, Erev Shabbos, the Aliyas, Ha'olamas, the food is different food. You say, yeah, convince my calories.
The Aliyas almost starts, and you get a taste of it.
It starts then, yeah. There's different stages in Kabbalah, what of Aliyas Ha'olamas. It's a far mikveh, noch mikveh, it's different stages. Before mincha, after mincha. Kegavna, barchu. It's different. L'chadoidi, it's different. In Priyetz Chaim, the Arizal is very... So, Mela. So this is the pshat. So when the energy goes up, it's not just his energy goes up. The world goes up, because that's what it is. The world is divine energy. So the whole world goes up. That's the key in the Nimshli you have to understand. So Vayishbaz B'yom HaShvi means God, so to speak, reclaims himself. What says he reclaims himself? That the world is now a place of infinity. You're in a space of infinity. There's a different energy on Shabbos. You're a different person on Shabbos. If you open yourself up to that. Very good. Even if you don't. So he says, Ani Hashem chayker leiv boichen kloyos. I am Hashem, Yirmiyah, Perikid Zayin. I search the heart, I examine the kidneys. Shalafi shani avaya b'chinas soivav kalaman. Sholamata kamoy lamayla. Hamashpili liris b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. I could see heaven and earth. Shamayim v'eretz shavim. Heaven and earth are the same. L'chein ani chayker leiv u'kloyos. Therefore, I investigate. I go into the heart and the kidneys. She'ein shum davar master l'fanav yizbarach kachashei chakeir. Nothing blocks, and darkness is like light. In other words, mitzat soivav, there's no space that's too low. There's no space that's distant. So you don't say, oh, this place, it's pasnish for Hashem to look at this. What, I'm going to look into your kidneys? That's not nice. It's full of, you know what, the kishkas. It's not, it's hot dogs. Right? It's not nice to be there, to look there. So he says, Ani Hashem. If it's Saivav Kalalman, Sechoi Kalev, Boichen Kloyas, Lamatas Kamay Lamayla. So the hashgacha in the lowest place is identical like the hashgacha in the highest place. When you say this is too small for God to care about, it's not because you know how small it is. It's you don't know who God is. If I say this life, this detail is too small to be significant, it's because you're not toifes the inyan of a lakus. You think Hashem, you're comparing it to a human being. You're talking about mamalu. When you're talking about soivev, the kidney. If I'm talking about me, then even the heavens are infinitely removed. You understand? So even the heavens, back to what I said, Edelkeit is kenkelinish, is grabkeit kenstidinish. The heavens are also pasnish to look at. it's also infinitely removed from me. And if I'm present because I'm choosing to be present, then earth is as significant as heaven. That's mitzad ani avaya. V'lachem b'Shabbos shenemer Shabbos Lashem. Hainu aliyas b'chinas memale kalamin b'seivav kalamin. What's Shabbos? Shabbos is memale is oila in seivav. What's that memale is oila in seivav? There's no dissonance anymore. Memale suddenly says, this is who I am. I'm infinite. Memale is oila in seivav. What's that memale is oila in seivav? The oil that throughout the week was nisamtzim, it was articulated, condensed, filtered, contracted and restricted in an energy that could become the defined finite reality of every creature to the point where it's completely concealed in this world. On Shabbos, Memali is oila in seivav. What says Memali is oila in seivav? Memali, so to speak, he rests. What's that he rests? Vayichala lekim, no tzimtzum. No tzimtzum. I don't have to condense the energy. So what's the energy? The energy is me. It's infinity. There's oneness. All the malachas of Shabbos are a result of this. Tosfos asks a question, why Masaka Shabbos begins with carrying? Yitzias HaShabbos. Carrying is the last one of the 39 malachas. It should be at the end. It's also called malacha gru, which means it's the most inferior of malachas. You're not really doing a change. When you cook or when you make a fire or when you write, you're making a change. Haitzah, you're just taking out a key from Shusech to Shusarab. So the Rishonim discussed this at length. One of the reasons is because it's malacha gru, therefore you wanted to start with it. The Balatanya says, because Yitzias HaShabbos represents all of Shabbos. Shabbos, the world is Rishus HaYachid. That's Shabbos. Taking out from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, or bringing in Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, meaning acknowledging that there's two Rishuyas, spiritually speaking, that represents the ultimate malacha of Shabbos. That the world is not a Rishus HaYachid. There's two domains. Middle of the week, there is Mamala Kalam. Huh? No, I don't mean, no, you have a Rishus HaRabim on Shabbos, you have a public domain. But the Nikud of taking out the Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim means, spiritually, what it represents is not just taking out from this house to outside. It represents the idea that I'm taking out the Kedusha of Shabbos from Achdus into Rabbim. Taking a Rishus HaRabim, where you feel the Rabbim, you don't carry their Dalet Amos. You're right. Every malach of Shabbos is the Sinion. L'mashal, you're not allowed to sew on Shabbos. Why not? Imagine you tell your wife, I want to connect to you more. So she says, how? I'll tie a rope. I'll tie you to me with a rope. And what do you say? It's going to help the marriage. Why not? We just connected. Yeah. So that when you're sewing on Shabbos, that's the inyan. Shabbos, the world is one. What are you being taifer? The same is true with boider. You boider psilas from eichel. It's all being insensitive to the core of Shabbos. So he says, "V'lachenu aliyah sa'olamas, shegam ha'olamas yesh lam aliyah, v'hainu gam ken b'chinas bittul shemizbatlam yesh li'ayin." So the whole world is energy. That's pshat bittul. What's pshat bittul? Mizbatlam yesh li'ayin. A whole week it's yesh, and Shabbos the world goes to ayin. V'zeu pirish vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz. What's that vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz? So everybody teaches. The heaven and earth were finished. He says much deeper. Vayichulu loshen klois hanefesh. The word vayichulu comes from the word klois hanefesh. Klois hanefesh means when the soul goes up and it expires. Actually, you say he died. Nadav and Avihu died from klois hanefesh. The word kala, a bride, yeah. We say in Tehillim, nichsefa v'gam kol sonafshi. What does kol sonafshi mean? My soul ended. But it doesn't mean my soul ended. It means my soul ended. It was subsumed in its source. Klois hanefesh. Vayichulu hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tzvam is the pshat. Shamayim and Eretz experienced the klois of their nefesh. Shebeshabbos b'bchinas aliyu bittel. That's vayichulu. Not vayichulu. Their work was complete. Vayichulu is they go into a state of aliyah and bittul, vayichulu. That's klois hanefesh. Like their soul goes up. B'meila, they're finished. Finished doesn't mean here their work was finished. Finished means they're finished. What do you mean they're finished? Not they're finished. Their separateness finishes. Their uptaich as mamali finishes. V'chein lashon Shabbos gamkin hashbasa shuinyim bittel. It's also al pinigla that way. The word Shabbos is the same word like hashbasa. By Pesach it says ach b'yom harishon tashbisu. What does tashbisu mean? Eliminate. What does Rashi say in Masaka's Psachim? Daf Daled. How do you know there's bittul chametz? Anybody learned Masakah Psachim? From which word? Tashbisu. Tashbisu means bittul. So literally we touch bittul means you nullify the chametz. He says no, that's bittul. Bittul means the yesh is bottled to the ayin. That's Shabbos. That's tashbisu. Tashbisu means you eliminate, you challenge the facade of yesh, and you allow it to become one with ayin. That's what bittul chametz is. That's what Shabbos is. How does that happen? Because Shabbos is a gili of soiv v'yichal elikim. Kanal binyan schar mitzvah. Like we said before about schar mitzvah. The greatest schar of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. The gilui of the bittul. The mitzvah is bittul, but the schar is the gilui of the bittul, which comes from Hashem, ayin mamish. He spoke about the two stages of bittul. The bittul you can initiate, and the bittul that has to be initiated, that you can't initiate. Right? That's the schar mitzvah, but it's really the mitzvah itself. He says that's the idea of Shabbos. That's why every Shabbos is a shtickle, yom shekul Shabbos u'menucha l'chayei olamim. We'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow, 7:45. Writing, yeah. When you really have to write, you got to bring it down.
The muscle works for the whole.
The writing articulates a certain energy from you. But the ayin, there's so much more.
Right.
There's infinitely more. So Shabbos is that particular manifestation going back to its shirish. Yeah. So the 6 days of creation is the way the Ein Sof articulates itself in a world. And everything is different and everything is separate. And on Shabbos, it goes back to the ayin. That's why we don't do malacha on Shabbos, because every malacha on Shabbos is changing the status of the world. That can only happen in yesh, not in ayin. When the world is in a state of ayin, you don't change its status. You embrace it. So Shabbos, you
would think the opposite. Even you could think on Shabbos, why do you have why is creating the larger picture?
Yeah. In other words, even Shabbos, pleasure to have you physically, not just virtually. Yeah. In other words, Shabbos too. It's not like Shabbos, the world is not created. The world is created, but it's a different type of world.
Right. The painting is there, and there's the colors and the lines, and it's all separate. But the
what's nirgish in it is the union of Sovev, not Mamala.
And now it's the Sovev after the Mamala.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the Mamala coming back to Sovev. In a way, it's deeper. Before Mamala, there's no Mamala.
Right.
Yeah, you don't nullify the world on Shabbos. There's no world.
Right.
There is a world, and everything continues.
You can't take out of a rishus because.
Right. The pshat is that the Mamale becomes Sovev. It's not that there's no Mamale anymore. He says Aliyah Samamale. That's what bittul is. Bittul is not there's no yesh. The yesh becomes an expression of ayin. You understand the difference?
Yeah.
Listen, we don't see, again, if I'm writing for hours and hours and hours and my hand is really working, yeah? And then I allow my hand to come back to itself. When you look at my hand, you don't see the difference. Right? Maybe if you take an X-ray, but you look at the chitzonius of the hand, what's the difference? I was writing an hour. I don't see with my physical eyes the transformation of my hand resting, but it's happening. There's something happening, right? It's reclaiming itself. Even though you don't see it. Somebody who didn't know that I was writing for hours looks at my hand, they don't see a difference. Same is true with the world. On Shabbos, it's a different world, but when you look physically, you may not see any difference. Unless you see things in a deeper way. Hamachadish b'toy b'chol intan ma'aseh b'reishis is the chiddush Shabbos also. But the Bria that says in the Torah, the Bria Shabbos is not from Dibur, it's from Machshava. It's from Pnimius. Hashem creates the world on Shabbos too. But it's Havaya, it's not a Likim. So he doesn't create the world on Shabbos. If we wouldn't create the world, there would be no world. But the Bria is Havaya, not the Likim. Vayichala Likim. It's without Tzimtzum.
That's why the food tastes so good.
That's why the food is different. You say it's a holy world on Shabbos. It's a different Metzias. The Mittel Rebbe writes in one of his Maimonim that there was a doctor who testified that the doifik, the pulse of a Jew on Shabbos is not like the pulse of a whole week. The Mittel Rebbe writes in Torah Chaim, one of his Maimonim, he says, one of the greatest doctors testified to him. They said it was a doctor, it's called, I heard from the Biel Khan, his name was Dr. Haventhal. He was a big doctor in Russia, Belarus. They said that one of the big doctors testified that the pulse is different. There's a Medrash, Eine Doimim Ma'ir Ponov Shaladim B'Shabbos Limei Sachal. Say about the Be'er Mayim Chaim, Reb Chaim Chernovitzer, that he was a cup hecha on Shabbos. He used to say it was physically that way. Right? Why? Because there's a shinui in the Welt, there's a shinui in the person. But the question is where I am to be able, how much I could experience it viscerally. It's okay, that depends on... That's what he said earlier, that the davening of every day creates Shabbos. So, right, there's a Shabbos every day in davening. If I daven every day, so then when Shabbos comes, I have a Shabbos. If not, I also have Shabbos, but it's a different Shabbos. Ja, ist verstanden? Vayichulu ha-shamayim v'aretz, klois ha-nefesh. Shamayim and Eretz experiencing ayin. Shutuf l'kadosh, kaloyim vayichulu nasa shutuf l'kadosh baruch hu b'maisa b'reishis. Why? Because maisa b'reishis is b'riya yesh me'ayin. On Shabbos is machen von yesh zurück zu ayin. So that's a shutfus. So you're a partner. Hashem makes from you. Yeah, that's the Vayichulu. Kaloimer Vayichulu. If you teufus the Vayichulu, so you become a partner. The Gemara says, Shabbos daf kuf yitas, you become a partner with Hashem. What's the partnership means? 50-50. Real partnership. Where am I a partner? I'm just eating the gefilte fish. Where am I a partner? The shutfus is, he made from ayin yesh. You make from yesh ayin. There's a fundraiser I know. He told me he only does fundraising on Shabbos. He's a very big fundraiser. I said, why? He says, Jews are different. Their hearts are open and their pockets are open. You can't get the check, but the pledges, he told me, only Shabbos. Said everything else is a waste of time. It's so much less, it's not worth it. But to use other words, he says, the weekday they give tzumim, and Shabbos, it's interesting. So you might say, people don't work, they're in a better mood, relax, better food, yeah, you sleep more. Okay, that's the Inyan Chitzoni. But the Inyan Pnimi is, Sunday a lot of people don't work either. It's not the same. It's also more relaxed, but it's also it's Shabbos, Sunday.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.